Welcome to this webinar series co-hosted by the National Good Food Network and the National Farm to Institution Metrics Collaborative. I'm joined by Hannah Lighton from Farm to Institution New England and Colleen Matz from the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems, who are helping to facilitate on the behalf of the collaborative. The National Good Food Network, coordinated by the Wallace Center at Windrock International, convenes good food professionals in communities of practice to share best practices, solve problems, and continuously re-energize. One of these communities of practice is around farm to institution metrics. The organizations in the National Farm to Institution Metrics Collaborative work across the country to measure and track the impact of institutional market from producer to buyer. The group started in 2014 and now has 30 members based in 20 states working at municipal, county, multi-county, state, regional, and national levels. The collaborative holds quarterly calls and occasional in-person meetings, offers opportunities for collaborative partnership, and provides a platform for sharing best practices, foundational metrics, terminology, tools, and resources. At the end of the webinar, we'll share some information on how to access the resources and get more information on the collaborative. These monthly 30-minute webinars are designed to provide a national audience of farm to institutional practitioners, supporters, and advocates with the tools they need to measure farm to institution efforts in meaningful ways. We will have time for some questions and answers at the end of the webinar. I want you to know exactly how to ask questions of our panelists. So your webinar screen should look like this, with the slide presentation on the left and the control panel on the right. Over in the control panel is a questions box. Since you're muted during the entire presentation, please use the questions box to ask Jeff your questions for this webinar. And I do encourage you to ask your question whenever it occurs to you. We'll hold it till the end of the webinar, but then you're not constantly thinking about that question. So now I'm going to hand it off to Jeff O'Hara. Jeff is an agricultural marketing specialist with the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service based in Washington, D.C. He has been a continuous advocate for local food for years now, including with Union of Concerned Scientists and as a collaborator with the Farmers Market Coalition. He holds a PhD in economics. Jeff?
Thank you, Jeff, for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. AMS has worked definitely closely with a number of the groups in the Farm to Institution Metrics Collaborative. And so I think this is the release of the agricultural census data provides a nice place for us to pause and sort of reassess on where we are with measuring local food system activity and what we can say about trends to date. So the issue that we're going to talk about today is that the Census of Agriculture, occurs every 5 years, and it really provides a unique opportunity to evaluate trends in the agricultural sector. The 2017 Census of Agriculture is not necessarily intuitive to interpret for those that follow local food sector trends because it has brand new questions on local food markets. So in many ways, this is great. The USDA has made considerable improvements in the way that it measures and tabulates local food data between 2012 and 2017, and this is reflected in the new questions contained within the 2017 Census of Agriculture. I think the challenge this presents is that it's hard to decipher trends with the new data, but I think that largely this is going to be an issue that's unique to 2017 because the questions are new, and as these questions become more standardized and asked consistently in the future years, inferring trends in local food market activity will become more straightforward. So to talk about where we got to in 2017, we actually have to walk back in time and figure out how we got there. And so very briefly, I'm just going to walk through what USDA has historically collected with regard to local food systems. Before 1978, there was no local food system questions on the Census of Agriculture. And then we'll talk about from 1970 to 2012, there was a brand new survey instituted in 2015 called the Local Food Marketing Practices Survey. And the new questions contained within that formed the basis of the Census of Ag questions in 2017. And then we'll provide some summary and concluding comments. So the Census of Agriculture, like I said, is administered by USDA every 5 years. The objective of the Census of Agriculture is to account for any place for which $1,000 worth of agricultural products were produced and sold. And so this is essentially the USDA definition of a farm, if you have $1,000 in sales. So in 2017, this is administered to roughly 3 million different distinct operations. They're not just looking for people that they know for sure have produced $1,000 worth of products, but that could have potentially produced it. So it's a very large undertaking here by USDA. It wasn't until 1978 in which the Ag Census began asking local food questions, and this is in response to the 1976 Direct-to-Consumer Marketing Act. So as such, in the 1978 Agricultural Census, they started asking questions about direct-to-consumer agricultural sales. And through the 2012 Ag Census, this was the only local food question available, and it was really targeted to measure direct-to-consumer sales of unprocessed commodities like fresh fruits and vegetables. So up through 2012, the Census of Agriculture did not have non-direct-to-consumer local sales measured at all. And other data sources were indicating that direct sales by farms to retailers and institutions and other local marketing channels were actually the bigger and more prominent local food market channels. So in some sense, the Census of Agriculture, what it was capturing about local food activity was largely incomplete. In 2012, they did introduce a binary question on whether farms made sales directly to retailers and institutions, but they didn't ask for sales data. The Census of Agriculture didn't measure value-added product sales. So vertically integrated farms with on-farm processing, and they produced meat or cheese or butter or cider or jam and sold them locally, those sales estimates were also not included in the total. And anecdotal evidence again suggested that that was a fairly important part of local food marketing. And another issue with the Census of Agriculture in general is that it's very difficult to add questions. You have to be careful of respondent burden. It'd be great to add all these questions, but you have to be cognizant of the time that farmers can't spend all of their time filling out surveys. There was also an agricultural resource management survey that USDA administers annually. This is largely targeted towards commodity farms, and it largely focuses on production practices. So there's geographic concentration. It doesn't ask a lot of detail about marketing. And because of this, the Local Food Marketing Practices Survey was designed by USDA to ask far more detail about marketing practices of farms than what we previously knew. So the Marketing Practices Survey was administered by USDA in 2016, and it collected data from 2015. It was given to farms that had indicated that they had undertaken local sales previously. So there were several important firsts with this survey. One is that it was the first time USDA collected data on value-added agricultural product sales. And it also introduced question on sales that farms were making directly to retailers, like supermarkets and grocery stores and restaurants. And also here I'm calling them distributors, but those could include institutions like schools and hospitals, as well as intermediaries that are distributing locally branded food products like food hubs. So this chart shows what happens if you measure direct-to-consumer sales over time and you also incorporate value-added agricultural product sales. And so the blue bar on the bottom reflects the Census of Agriculture estimate of what local food sales were like between 1978 and 2012. And so what we see in 2015 is that when you look at commodity sales in the blue, but then also take into account value-added sales, which is the red and black stripes, you're really looking at commodity sales exclusively means that you're really only capturing about half of the market for local food sales. Another point I want to make with this slide here is that I've converted everything on this particular chart into 2017 dollars, and so in essence I've adjusted for inflation. And I think this is a confusing thing with the Census of Agriculture. When NASH releases the data tables, everything is in nominal terms, so they did not adjust for inflation. And so one of the challenges when we were looking at the 2012 Census of Agricultural data is that the number in the Census of Agriculture was larger in 2012 than 2007. But actually, when you adjusted for inflation, direct-to-consumer agricultural sales declined a little bit from 2007 to 2012. And that was a point of confusion, particularly with regard to some USDA products that were released describing what trends were in local food activity. So the 2015 Local Food Marketing Practices Survey really built upon and added a lot of new insight into what we previously were able to say about local food market activity. So the blue bars, again, are commodity sales. And so I put direct-to-consumer the direct-to-consumer commodity sales are underlined and in italics because that's what historically was captured in the Census of Agriculture. But now, the Local Food Marketing Practices Survey, we have direct sales by farms to distributors, direct sales by farm to retailers. We're also capturing value-added sales of direct-to-consumer sales. And so, in essence, the local food markets, the local importance of local food market factors, the importance of the local food sector has now gone up by about a factor of 6, roughly. And if you compare it to other conventional agricultural sectors, local food sales are now bigger than cotton and almost, on par with wheat. And so you can then make the case that the magnitude or the importance of local food markets for farms are up there in terms of the importance and are certainly of the economic significance of the importance of other major agricultural commodities. So the 2017 agricultural census questions were designed based upon the new questions that were contained within the Local Food Marketing Practices Survey. So the direct-to-consumer sales question in the 2017 Census of Ag also included value-added products in addition to commodities. Again, in 2012, this question only encompassed commodities. And we also had a new question on non-direct-to-consumer local sales of value-added products and commodities. And this sales data was never previously connected in the Census of Agriculture. As I already mentioned, there was a farm count available in 2012. But we're going to talk about the fact that the questions are phrased slightly differently. And so we have to be careful about how we infer trends with those two different questions. And they also, in the 2017 Census of Agriculture, there's a brand new question on total value-added product sales from farms, and it's irrespective of the market channel that farms use. So I think one of the key issues that arise is, well, how can you infer trends between 2017 and 2015? I think one of the important points that needs to be made is that the 2017 agricultural census is probably more accurate. So the agricultural census is a population of all farms in the United States. The Local Food Marketing Practices Survey was a sample of farms that they were selling locally, and the national level estimates were extrapolated from only about 5,700 responses. So it was a fairly low sample size that they used to develop the national level statistics. And because it was a brand new survey, the accuracy of those estimates were also going to be contingent upon the farms that received the survey. Now, one issue that arose with the Local Food Marketing Practices Survey is that USDA did not release sales data of farm to institution sales because the response level for farms participating in those markets was fairly low. And so a key thing that I think we need to have everyone aware of is that we need practitioners and stakeholders to help USDA get the word out about these surveys and to stress to people the importance of responding to them. If there's low responses, if farmers don't really understand the reason or the value of why they should take their time to respond to them, then the data is less accurate. And that also means that because surveys have fixed budgets and we're kind of wasting money with sending surveys that people aren't responding to, these surveys people might be less inclined to take these surveys in the future. But given all these caveats, between 2015 and 2017, local non-direct-to-consumer sales increased by about 50%, from $6 billion to $9 billion. So it was fairly encouraging development that we saw between 2015 and 2017. And here's what this looks like graphically. We did see a slight decline in direct-to-consumer sales between the time period, but the trends between 2015 and 2017 appeared favorable, but again, keeping in mind that there were some different methodological issues in how the surveys were administered. So then the next question that may arise is, well, if the 2015 and 2017 data aren't quite comparable, what about 2017 and 2012? So for reasons I've already described, it's really impossible to compare sales data. But I am going to argue that it's maybe possible to compare trends in farm counts. And despite the fact that the questions have changed. And the reason I'm going to argue that is because the phrasing of the 2017 agricultural census questions are broader than they were in 2012. So if there was a decline in the number of farms, that would really be that would be occurring because of the result of a trend, and it wouldn't be because a question was changed to be more expansive. Let's see, and I'm going to put up the question phrased in 2012. They asked farms to indicate if they sold directly to retailers that in turn sell directly to consumers. And in the agricultural census, there were a number of examples provided of what that could entail. So this would include direct sales to retailers, grocery stores, schools, and hospitals, which I think nowadays we call those institutions. We'd call the first two categories restaurants and grocery stores, and other businesses. So they were using retailers as a shorthand for what we, I think, now would refer to as retailers' institutions. But this still captures the idea of what they're looking for. In the 2017 agricultural census, I think there was a brand new, and I've put this in bold for emphasis, that they asked farms to report sales they made to retailers, institutions, as well as food hubs that sold local and regionally branded products. So now they're asking farmers to also report sales that they would make to essentially local distributors. And they provided a much more expansive list in the Census of Agriculture text of what farmers could consider as eligible in responding to this question. But I think the key issue here is that they really would be encouraged to consider distributor sales in 2017, but not in 2012. And so what we see is, if we look at the trends between 2012 and 2017, in 2012 we had about 49,000 farms that said they were selling direct to retailers or institutions. In 2017, we're seeing we have about 29,000 farms that are selling direct to retail or institutions, as well as food hubs. And so this is, in total, this is at least a 41% decline. And you can see these are the top 10 states with the number of farms that are selling direct to retail and institutions in 2017. And you can see across the board, with the exception of California, that there were really, significant reductions everywhere, including in the Mid-Atlantic with New York and Pennsylvania, in the Midwest with Wisconsin and Michigan, and as well as in the Pacific Northwest with Oregon and Washington. And I will just verbally mention that Texas in 2012 was the number 2 ranked state in the number of farms selling direct to retailers, with almost 3,000. And they had a decline of about 81% in 2017, and are now at number 18 in the rankings. So they're not even on the table anymore in the way I've designed it. So, really just to bring us back to what are the main points here we're trying to make for understanding direct to retail institution sales. What can we say? Again, the data are suggestive that their sales could have been increasing between 2015 and 2012. Again, as I say suggestive, because those were different surveys that were administered, and it's hard to know definitively whether that was the case. I think it's probably easier to conclude that farm counts declined considerably between 2012 and 2017 of the number of farms doing direct to retail and institution. But it's probably going to be tricky to understand why using the Census of Agriculture data, because the questions were phrased differently between the two versions of the Ag Census. So more localized, studies are going to be needed, and we're really going to need practitioners on the ground with extensive knowledge of what's going on in their area to help provide guidance and input into telling us and everyone about what's going on and what's causing these national level trends. So I do, it's important to also emphasize that in 2022 and going forward, I think we're going to be better equipped to infer trends as the new questions then become consistently asked over time. Just so everyone's aware, a new local food marketing practices survey is going to be planned by NASS for 2021. It's going to collect 2020 data, so it won't be going into the field for a couple of years. But again, just to reiterate, remember that in the last one that we had, very low level of farm to institution sales. We really need groups to encourage and help get the word out about this survey and encourage people to reply to it. And I guess, again, another thing that's worth emphasizing is that USDA surveys are really designed to measure farm sales. And so they're not going to account for the fact that, someone that bakes bread is going to be selling into local food markets, that there could be fishers selling into local food markets. Other types of food manufacturers may be participating as well. And so to keep in mind just that when we're talking about USDA data so far, we're really focusing on farm sales, and that there's many other important facets of local food market activity that are not being captured. And so if you have any further questions about it, my email address and phone number are up on the screen. And just as sort of by way of background, I'm an economist here at the Agricultural Marketing Service. We are also putting on a National Direct Agricultural Marketing Summit in October in Chicago. And the website for the conference is there at the bottom. It's at localfoodeconomics.com. That's a website where we maintain a lot of our technical assistant resources /Ag Summit. You're definitely welcome to attend and participate. We can geek out over Ag Census data over drinks, and we can talk about this until we're all exhausted from talking about it. But I think there'll be a great place to continue the dialogue, but also feel free to reach out to me directly above if you want to talk about it some more. So I think with that, that's going to wrap up the comments that I had, and I'm happy to turn it over to Colleen.
All right, thank you, Jeff. We have some questions rolling in, and folks, I'm sure will be adding more as we wrap up here, but there are a couple of clarifying questions that I wanted to be sure to get to you right away from some of our listeners so that we can set things straight for the rest of the discussion. Firstly, what are commodities versus value-added products?
That's a great question. Commodities in the simplest form are really unprocessed agricultural goods that are on farm and are essentially sold to a consumer or a retailer without any further processing. So fresh fruits are a common one. Fresh vegetables are a common one. Eggs can also be considered one. Fluid milk can be considered one. I would say to be candid about it, how to define a value-added agricultural product is a challenging thing, and some USDA surveys don't always define it consistently, and sometimes there's differences in how it's defined across USDA programs. So it's very important to read the fine print and to understand exactly what we're talking about. But the basic idea is that it's an agricultural commodity that is really not transformed in any state.
Thank you. And similar clarifying question, what are non-direct-to-consumer sales? Can you describe that a bit more?
Yeah, so direct-to-consumer sales are predominantly ones that occur at on-farm stands or farmers markets or through CSA programs, and then also in more recent years through online marketplaces. So when we also talk about local sales, we can also think of them as occurring to retailers like grocery stores, restaurants, direct sales to institutions like particularly schools and hospitals and colleges, and also sales that are going to occur to distributors that market local products.
So there's another question here about non-edible products. Are those included in local food sales data, or are they separate?
They're not included. So sales of wool and cut flowers and other non-edible products, those have never been included in any USDA estimates of local food market activity. And again, it's another way in which USDA's statistics are in some sense really only encompassing a part of what is really being transacted at local food marketplaces.
Okay, so here's a tougher question for you. Would the increase in food hubs be a potential reason for the decline in direct to retail?
Well, it's a good question. I think that from what I've seen out of, actually, Colleen, you might be better equipped to answer some of this, because I know Michigan State runs a biannual survey of food hubs, and there's some churn with the number of food hubs. I think we don't have a full grasp on the exact number that are in place at any particular one point in time. We've also seen some anecdotal through the FNS farm to school census that some schools that have undertaken farm to school projects have subsequently discontinued them. And so I think it's very much an open question about what's going on, and I could provide some speculation or off the hand opinions or conjectures, but I think I definitely don't have a firm grasp on it.
Yes, and I think the topic of the food hub survey data from the national level could be a whole other webinar that we can get into another time, and how they're playing into these farm-to-institution markets specifically. But for now, I'll run to the next question here. Can data from the Local Food Marketing Survey be reported reliably at the state level, or is the sample representative nationally only?
So the Census of Agriculture is reported publicly at the county level. So anybody can go onto the USDA's website and look up their county and get Census of Ag data, except for cases in when it's fairly small. So with the Local Food Marketing Practices Survey, NASS only released public data for 30 states, and not all of the questions. There was only really a few questions in which they released that data for 30 states, and nothing was available at the county level. So, I mean, I think that the public data that's available for those 30 states could be used. But I think that also the important thing that we probably just need to keep in mind is that we need to help NASS, we being practitioners and people in this community, we need to help NASS in getting the word out about this survey, and we need to help them find farmers that are participating that may potentially didn't receive this survey the last time.
So that's a call to all of our listeners to help promote in the future. And then the next question here is, do you have the stat for each state's decline in direct retail or institution sales between 2017 and 2012?
I personally have it entered for, I think, maybe 20 states, but it's very easy to access it on the NASS website. And if that's sort of not clear to people, I can send you the links. I think in 2000, they actually have some features on the website that allow you to download the table as tables, so you don't have to manually enter it. And I can point people in the direction of how they can create their own customized tables. They have the feature, but it's not necessarily always intuitive to use. So I can, if people have questions about that, I can address them.
And you can see Jeff's contact information there, should you want more information on how to go about that. So the last question that I'm afraid we have time for, we didn't get through quite all of them, but this is a good, bigger, clarifying question to wrap up. What was the definition of local?
So the way NASS has defined local for this purposes is on the market channel that people use. So they are not defining it on geographic, like political boundaries like a state. They're not using a geographic distance. They're asking questions based upon the market channels that you use. So direct to consumer sales, direct to retailer sales, institution sales. And they're really punting on, what is local, because we know that's a nebulous term and it can mean different things to different people.
All right, thank you for that. And I'm going to thank all of our listeners, too, for joining this webinar in the National Farm to Institution Metrics Collaborative webinar series. And as Jeff Farbman mentioned, the collaborative is made up of leading farm-to-institution organizations from across the country who come together to share best practices for measuring the impact of institutional marketing across the supply chain. You can read more about the collaborative and access a sample of resources from collaborative members by following the link on the screen. You can see it there. And if you have any questions about the collaborative, you can email Hannah Layton at hannah@farmtoinstitution.org. So be sure to tune in to our next webinar in this series. We're not used to promoting ourselves on this series, but our next June webinar will feature yours truly, and I'll be reflecting on Cultivate Michigan, which is a member-based campaign launched with the Michigan Farm to Institution Network in 2014. The campaign was designed to help member institutions find, buy, promote, and track more local foods as they work toward the Michigan Good Food Charter goal of 20% Michigan foods by 2020, but it has also proven to be an important platform for communication, gathering information, and network organizing. So this webinar will be held on Tuesday, June 25th from 3:30 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard. So mark your calendars, and a link to register is going to be posted soon, and you can see where to find it on the slide there. Thank you all for joining, and it's 4 o'clock, so we're going to sign off now.